Lizzie Borden was innocent, and we've been looking at the wrong killer for over a century. That is a claim of author Rich Little, and in just a moment, you're going to hear directly from him.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to Surviving the Survivor. This is the global phenomenon, bringing you the very best guests in all of true crime. And tonight, a special edition of STS. We go back more than 130 years to one of the most infamous murder cases in all of American jurisprudence history and criminal history, the brutal axe killings inside the home of Andrew Borden and Abby Borden in Fall River, Massachusetts. The prime suspect, Lizzie Borden, who was tried, acquitted, but forever etched into American folklore. But, what if everything we think we know about this case is wrong? That's one of the claims from our guest, who is here right now, Rich Little, not to be confused with the Canadian comedic actor Rich Little. This is the down-to-earth Rich Little, who has been a teacher in Massachusetts for more than 55 years. Thank you for joining us, Rich. Appreciate you being here. And do me a favor, hold up that book of yours, if you don't mind, so people can take a look at it. And it is called Cold Case to Case Closed. Elizabeth Borden, My Story Says Lizzie Didn't Do It. Where do people find the book, first of all, Rich?
Well, the book is available both on Amazon, and it's also on eBay. Through eBay, you can get a personalized copy. It's just a little bit easier to do it that way, but that's where you can get it.
It's an interesting read, so everyone go out and check it out. Now, Rich, you say that the real killer, we're going to dig into this, is someone named John Morse, Lizzie's own uncle. But just for some background before we start to pry this open, you have to go all the way back to August 4th, 1892. There's a double axe murder in broad daylight. The victims, of course, Andrew and Abby Borden. There appears to be no forced entry. Extremely violent, very, very personal killings, according to law enforcement. Lizzie is subsequently arrested and tried in 1893. She's acquitted in about 90 minutes, and to this day, the case remains officially unsolved. And for over a century, the debate has never stopped. So, Rich, first and most obvious question. I mean, you're a teacher, and for full disclosure, he's one half of the Seth Rosinski. How do I pronounce it? Rosinski?
Rosinski.
Yes, that's what I thought. So he's one half of the Seth Rosinski podcast. And a teacher for over 50 years. So he's an educator. This is an interesting story. But, Rich, the first and obvious most question, what piqued your interest in this case enough to write a book about it?
Well, it starts back probably 30 years ago. I have a daughter, and the daughter, Brenda, was enthralled with the Lizzie Borden case from the time she was in high school. And at one time, it was my birthday, and she said, let's go down to Fall River and we'll tour the Lizzie Borden crime scene house, which we did. And I had heard of Lizzie Borden because everybody around here has heard that Lizzie Borden had an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. And when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. And I assumed, like so many others, that she was an axe murderer. And we toured the house, and it was an interesting tour of a three-story house, which was formerly two-family, that Andrew Borden purchased and made into a single family with a kind of an unusual floor plan. And over time, I decided to work on a project called The Innocence of It All. And I had a co-author up in Canada, and her name was Beverly Folstad. And she and I worked on cases, and it never got published. But Lizzie Borden was one of the cases that we worked on. And from those cases, there has been several books written, and she and I put together this book about Lizzie Borden. Throughout the book, you'll see comments by Lizzie, and those were written by Bev. And she and I have never met. We've only talked by phone and by computer like this. And she was the voice of Lizzie throughout the book.
How did you connect with this co-author?
Well, she and I were on a chat room for authors, and she said, "Gee, I always wanted to write a book," and I had written a book previously, a fiction book about a baseball player, and I was looking for another project to work on, and she seemed interested in the same type of historical crimes that I was, and we put together about 18 different crimes that occurred both in the United States and in Canada, because she lives in Edmonton, Alberta. Mm-hmm. And we never got it published, but we did take the Lizzie Borden case in particular, and that's what this book was developed from.
Yeah. So take us back, I think it was 1892, to Fall River, Massachusetts. Just sort of set the scene for us. I mean, what kind of town was Fall River back then? Who were Andrew and Abby Borden? I mean, were they known figures in the town, and who was Lizzie to them? Set it all up for us. Okay, so if you look at a map of Massachusetts, and especially coastal Massachusetts, in Boston, north of Boston is called the North Shore, and south of Boston is called the South Shore. And then you got that arm that hangs out in the water that looks like somebody with a fist, and that's called Cape Cod. Mm-hmm. And then going further down the coast, you have Cape Cod, and of course the islands of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. And as you head towards Rhode Island, there's an area that's now called the South Coast. And that's primarily Bristol County. And the three major cities in Bristol County were Taunton, which is the county seat, and New Bedford, which was a whaling community, and then Fall River, which was a textile community. And these were major cities. And Fall River, at the time of the crime, 1892, was about 93 to 95,000 people. And that's approximately what the population is today. But there were 120 to 125 mills in Fall River, mostly textile, of which Andrew Borden was on the board of directors of several of those mills. And Andrew Borden did not come from money. Andrew Borden was a self-made man. His father was a fishmonger, and he got into the furniture business, tables and chairs and couches and coffins and things like that. And that's where he made his money. He got into real estate. He became director of several banks. He was on the board of directors of several mills. And he married, and his wife's name was Sarah Borden. And they had three daughters. The first was Emma, and then they had a second daughter named Alice. And we never hear much of Alice because she died as a child when she was approximately 2 years old. And this was not uncommon back in the 1880s, 1860s, that childhood diseases were prevalent and also often fatal. Then they had a third daughter, and her name was Lizzie Andrew Borden. Her middle name, she was named after her father. And the difference in age between Lizzie and her older sister, Emma, was approximately 9.5 years. And so
several years, 2 years after Lizzie was born, her mother succumbed to natural causes, some type of infection. Of course, this is way before the days of antibiotics and things like that. And so here you have Andrew Borden and two daughters, and he's a widower. He remarried 2 years after the death of his first wife, and he married Abby. She became Abby Borden. She was known as a spinster because she was approximately 37 years old when she married, and she had never been married before. Basically, she was the only mother that Lizzie ever knew. Lizzie did not remember her.
And what do we know? So Andrew and Abby, the father and stepmother to Lizzie Andrew Borden, and that's kind of neat. I think that she's named after her father, middle name. But what do we know about the family dynamic? Did they get along? A lot of times there's issues with stepmothers and children that they are resentful. But what do we know about the dynamic between Lizzie, her father, and Abby?
Well, the dynamics between those three seemed to be normal. It might have not been that normal with Emma, who was a pre-adolescent, about 12 years old when her father remarried. And she had probably been the woman of the house until he married Abby. And there might have been some animosity there. But as far as Lizzie was only 3 years old, and Abby Borden was really the only mother that she ever knew.
I have a lot of questions for you, but I guess the first one that I'm most interested in, you've got to go back like 130 plus years. How did you research this story? I mean, did you go to, are there archives at the Fall River Public Library? Were you just online? How did you find the research material for this? And you wrote this, I think, pre-AI. So there you go.
Yeah, I started the project back in 2011 and put the book together between 2012 and 2014. And the book came out did pretty well, but my research was done primarily by reading. There seemed to be more information to be gathered by reading it, and there's several excellent books that were put out over the years between the crime and now, and those served as a source of information that I use. The actual police records that were available, fortunately for me, somebody had transcribed them from written into print. So those were also available. Several visits to the Fall River Historical Society, which has an excellent exhibit on Lizzie Borden. And I was able to gather from books written by two of the curators down at the Fall River Historical Society who have come out with some epic Lizzie Borden. There's one called Lizzie Borden Parallel Lives, which describes her life and Fall River's life during that time period. So I was able to put the reports together, and everything, all the police reports seemed to be regular. Everything seemed to fall in place. And then I bought a book online, and with the book came a set of pictures, a little note, and a newspaper. And the little note said, it was from the purchase, from the seller of this book, said, this was in my father's collection. He was a Lizzie Borden follower, and he always tries to solve the case. And here is his book, and here is the picture set that he had. There were actual sets of pictures that were shown, that were sold as a set during the trial and after the trial, kind of a morbid situation. Wow. And there was also a newspaper in that group, and the newspaper was the Fall River Herald. and it was the original newspaper from August 5th, the day after the murders. And there was an article in there by a unknown author, but probably one of the reporters for the Fall River Herald, which described a conversation that a police officer had to check down an alibi of one of the people that was at the house. And that person was Lizzie's uncle, Lizzie and Emma's uncle, John Morse. And I read the article by the newspaper reporter, and I read the report by the police officer, a guy by the name of William Medley, that were taken at the same time. And the two reports did not jive. It destroyed Uncle John's alibi.
All right, hold that for 1 second. And that's John Morse, who is the person that Rich Little believes actually murdered Andrew and Abby Borden. But so the murders take place, correct me if I'm wrong, August 4th, 1892. What do we know about that day, Rich? How did that day play out? Walk us into the crime scene.
Okay, so here we are in the Borden house, and there are 5 people there overnight. There's Mr. and Mrs. Borden, Abby Borden, and Andrew Borden, who became the victims. There was Lizzie Borden, the daughter, Bridget Sullivan, who was a domestic servant who worked for the Bordens, and an overnight guest who normally did not stay at the Borden residence, but he and Mr. Borden had business relations, and he was there to discuss business relations, and that was Uncle John Morse. Now, John Morse was the brother of the deceased Mrs. Sarah Borden, the first Mrs. Borden, who succumbed to disease during the Civil War. And he was in Iowa and was in the cattle and horse business in Iowa. He was originally from Fall River, but moved to Iowa. And he and Andrew Borden had this arrangement of shipping horses and cattle from Iowa up through Chicago by rail to Fall River, where they were offloaded and brought to a farm that was owned by Mr. Borden. And this is one of Mr. Borden's enterprises.
Wow.
So Mr. Borden stayed overnight. Now, the other daughter, Emma, that would be Lizzie's sister, had been away, staying with friends in a nearby town called Fairhaven. A lot of people call it Fairhaven, but here in Massachusetts, with our strange and unusual accents, we call it Fairhaven.
Interesting.
So those are the people. There were 5 people who stayed overnight between the 3rd and the 4th.
So there's not a lot of possibilities, because we know there's 5 people, but 2 of them are dead. We don't have to get too gruesome, but they both died from axe wounds. I mean, approximately how many wounds, and how did authorities get notified that this had transpired on August 4th of 1892? When did police find out?
Okay, so the wounds, as the poem goes, 40 and 41, that is a bit of an over-exaggeration. Mrs. Borden was struck initially in the forehead, face-to-face with her killer, and she suffered approximately 18 blows to the head.
Wow.
And she was... the estimated time of death was just after 9 o'clock, between 9:15 and 9:30. And I'll explain a little bit later just how they determined that. Andrew Borden was murdered approximately an hour and 45 minutes later. So these 2 attacks did not occur at the same time. They were in different periods of time, and his autopsy showed that he was struck similarly to the first victim, but on the opposite side of the back of the head. And his wounds are numbered 10.
That's interesting. So the two murders happen an hour and 45 minutes apart, and there's 3 other people in the home. Rich, what do you attribute that gap in time to?
Well, I can give you let me give you a quick, and I'm not sure if you can see that.
Yeah. I can see
This
it.
is something that Seth and I did on a podcast where I showed the wounds, and these are the wounds of Andrew, and this is the side view.
Wow.
And so there was substantial trauma to the back and the front of the head because he's reclining when it happened. Abby, on the other hand, hers was a little bit different. However, very, very similar, done with the same type of implement. And her side view looks like that. So all of those red lines that you see were determined by the medical examiner to be separate wounds.
Well, but just going back to this, because I'm intrigued by this. Typically, when 2 people are murdered, it's usually back to back. I mean, I'm not a criminal expert or criminologist, but what do you attribute that hour and 45-minute gap to? What was going on in that hour and 45 minutes between the murders?
Well, Andrew Borden had left the house at approximately 9 o'clock for his daily walk down to Fall River Center to visit several of his businesses down there. He visited 2 of the banks. He also had a construction project going on where a new building was being built, which is still there on the historical register, called the Borden Building. And they were putting in windows that day. So he traveled downtown and he left the home at approximately 9 o'clock. Uncle John Moss, who was also there overnight because he had arrived the day before. He had not been staying at the Bordens, but he arrived on the afternoon of the 3rd and went out to visit Mr. Borden's farm in nearby Swansea. That's where the cattle and horses were kept. And then came back and they had a business discussion. The rumor is, and this was overheard by Lizzie when she came into the back from a walk that she had taken, that the discussion became heated. Mr. Borden wanted to get out of the horse and cattle business. They were losing too many animals. It's a long trip from Iowa to Massachusetts. You had to send what they called cowboys to take care of those animals because the railroad didn't water and feed them when they were shipped like that. You had to send somebody along to take care of them. And it had been a warm summer, and they had lost some livestock. And Mr. Borden was starting to question the affordability and efficiency of running that operation. So that's why Mr. Moss was there, and he was invited to stay overnight. We slept in the 2nd floor guest bedroom, and he was the second person up in the morning. Bridget Sullivan was up first, approximately 6 o'clock. He came down from, and her bedroom was on the 3rd floor, only accessible by the back stairway. His bedroom, where he stayed the night, was on the 2nd floor, which was only accessible from the front stairway. So she came down the back stairway into the kitchen and started to prepare breakfast. He came down the front stairway. They said they never saw each other in the approximately 45 minutes to an hour that they were both on the 1st floor. Mrs. Borden came down next, followed by Mr. Borden. Breakfast was served at approximately 7:15. Mr. Morse said that was the first time that he saw Bridget Sullivan. Bridget Sullivan said that was the first time that she saw Mr. Morse at about 7:15. As it approached 9 o'clock, Mr. Morse left to go downtown to mail something at the post office, or so he said. When questioned, he could not remember who he sent that postcard to. And
which is odd, right? If you're going to send a postcard, you're going to know, right?
Right. And just after 9 o'clock, that's when Lizzie arose and came down from her bedroom on the second floor. So she was not there for breakfast. She had cookies and coffee at approximately 9 o'clock and talked with Mrs. Borden at the time. And my theory is that Mr. Morse re-entered the house, went back to the room where he stayed overnight, and at that time, Mrs. Borden was in that room fixing the bed and tidying up. I believe that they had a argument which quickly turned violent, and we'll have to give away Mr. Morse's profession, because that sort of plays into what happened. By profession, Mr. Morse was a butcher. He worked at the Davis Meat Market. Now, he came back 2 years before 1892 from Iowa, still had the farm out in Iowa, still had people out there tending to the farm working for him. And he worked at the Davis Meat Market in New Bedford. And he had this little side gig going with Mr. Borden on the farm over in Swansea. And that may explain what happened to Mrs. Borden.
And it sounds like Uncle John Morse was having, and Andrew Borden, at least, wasn't necessarily interested in that sort of side business anymore. Is that right? Was that?
Well, I think
that has been motive.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. And let you finish.
No. I was just curious. Like if there was any. It seems. I think if I heard you correctly, there was some issue where Andrew was looking to tamp down the business, so maybe there was some sort of financial motive for the crime, where Uncle John Morse was upset that that was coming to an end.
That there very well could be, and they'd had a couple of incidents, and one involved a horse on the way from Iowa to Swansea, Mass, gave birth to a foal. And when the train arrived in Fall River and they offloaded it, there was somebody there who wanted to buy the foal and paid for the foal. But they were told, you better pick the foal up in 3 or 4 weeks because it's newly born and it needs to be nursed by the mother. And so why don't you pick it up at the farm in approximately 4 to 5 weeks, which the purchaser did. And when he came to pick up the horse, or pick up the foal pony, it had developed a limp and he wanted his money back, and which he did get his money returned, but of course he did not take the foal. And they had also had quite a bit of animals passing away on the way between Chicago and Massachusetts because of the warm weather, etc. And I think Mr. Borden was getting sick of the issues, the trouble. It wasn't turning the profit that he wanted. He had other projects that he was working on that consumed his time. And I think he wanted to close down the operation. And that's what the discussion was on the 3rd of August in the evening.
So it sounds like there was a potential motive here, because his Uncle John Morse's future earnings could have been affected by this. But let's go back to the possible suspects here. I assume Bridget Sullivan is ruled out. For whatever reason, John Morse is at the time ruled out. But how soon after the crime is committed is Lizzie Borden arrested, and why did they arrest her if you don't think she did it?
Well, on the morning of the 4th, that would be a Thursday, after Mr. Morse left, and perhaps after he left the second time, he visited relatives about 1.25 miles from the Borden house. And he had a cousin that lived on Wybosset Street. And he went to Wybosset Street. He went by horse-drawn trolley. And he used all of this as part of his alibi. He knew that there were 4 priests riding on the trolley. He knew that the trolley conductor's number was something like 39. And he had a lot of information that helped support his alibi. The problem with the alibi is, if you look at the police report, Officer William Medley interviewed Uncle John's cousin, Lydia Emery, and said, did you have a guest here this morning? She said, yes, John Moss. He's a relative of mine. And he said, well, what time did he arrive? And what time did he depart? And she was unsure of the departure time. But there's another person that comes involved in this, and this is a Dr. Seabury Bowen. And he was a neighbor of the Bordens. He was the Borden's family doctor. And he had been called to Wybosset Street on that day because there was a niece who was visiting and she was ill. And he was out doing house calls and he was notified. And he happened to also go to Wybosset Street. And what happened was, she told this information to the police officer, and the police officer wrote this all down. And with every book I send out, I put in a copy of that police report that was filed by William Medley. And that is the final word on how it was presented in court, which gave him an alibi. But soon after the police officer left, there was a knock at her door, and it was a reporter from the Fall River Herald. And he said, wasn't that Officer Medley who was here? And she said, yes. Well, what did he want? What did he say? Of course, by this time, the murders were all over town, and everybody was talking about it. And she told the police, the reporter, the story. But back then, being in the newspaper was like on social media. Yeah. She couldn't stop. She had to tell the reporter more. And what she told him was that John Moss arrived and he left, and she thought the time was somewhere around 11:30. And then she added, and Dr. Bowen arrived at about the same time. And the reporter said, did they see each other? And she said, no, I don't think so. But my cousin was leaving as Dr. Bowen was arriving. And this comes in to be very, very important because back at the crime scene, Lizzie was the one who discovered her father with his skull bashed in in the sitting room on a settee, which is something like a couch. And she immediately called for Bridget, who was on the 3rd floor. Come down, something's happened to father. Go get Dr. Bowen, who lived directly across the street. And so Bridget Sullivan ran across the street, talked to Dr. Bowen's wife, and she says, well, he's out doing house calls. And so she goes back to Lizzie and says, he's not available. And Lizzie says, please go find my friend Alice Russell and tell her to come over. And with that, the next door neighbor thought that something was going on. Her name was Adelaide Churchill. She's a former Well, she was not the former, but she was the daughter of the former mayor of Fall River.
Mm.
And so she came running over. Just at that time, Dr. Bowen returned from his rounds, pulled up in the buggy out in front of his house. His wife came out and said, something's gone on over at the Borden house. They need you over there. And he ran over to the Borden house with his bag, and they directed him into the sitting room. And it was Dr. Bowen that pronounced Andrew Borden deceased. He checked his time, and it was approximately 11:15.
Wow.
Now, Mrs. Churchill, who was the neighbor, ran to get help, and she ran across the street. There was a stable, and there was a gentleman at the stable, and his name was Cunningham. And she said, something's happened to Mr. Borden. And she mentioned something about stabbing. We need to notify the police. And of course, not everyone had a telephone at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The paint store down at the corner had a telephone, and Mr. Cunningham knew that. So he ran down to the paint store, went inside, and asked if he could use the phone. And the owner said, sure. And guess who he called?
Who does he call?
You would think he would call the police. But he was a wannabe reporter. He was actually a newspaper distributor.
Mm-hmm.
So before he called the police, he called
boy.
three newspapers, the three daily newspapers in Fall River.
Oh, boy.
And then he called the police department.
Mm.
And of all days to have a event like this, the police department was shorthanded because many of them were on their annual excursion by steamer. Now, Fall River is a saltwater port. It's inland a bit, but it is a saltwater port.
Mm-hmm.
And you can leave Fall River by steamer. And the annual police excursion had gone to Rocky Point, Rhode Island. And so he was undermanned.
Oh, boy.
And he sent the booking officer to investigate.
Wow. I want people to be able to read the book. This is fascinating. So I want to kind of skip ahead here. So Lizzie's obviously the one arrested for this crime. How long after the murders does the trial take place, and why is she acquitted in such record time? I mean, it seems like a very fast amount of time. 90 minutes, she's acquitted.
Well, on the day of the murders, the police officer who was the first to arrive was at 11:25, and before he went in the door, he checked his clock, because that's what police officers do. And who greeted him at the door? Dr. Bowen. So we know Dr. Bowen is at the crime scene. We know that the police officer is at the crime scene, and it is 11:25. They rally the police. The police arrive. A crowd arrives. Pedestrians are wandering all over the place, looking in windows. They're walking inside the barn, which is kind of important because that's where Lizzie's alibi exists. And by 12 o'clock, the police officer had arrived for several reasons. They suspected Lizzie. And number one, she was 32 years old. She was unmarried. She was a spinster.
How old was the father and stepmother at this point?
Now, the father was about a month shy of his 70th birthday.
Wow.
And Mrs. Borden, Abby, was approximately 63 years old.
Mm.
And we say approximately because we're not really sure of her date of birth or her exact date of birth. So she was 63 years old.
And 70 back then is a pretty substantial lifespan.
Yes, and he was in good shape. He was approximately just about 6 foot tall and walked every day. He said he had no vices. He did not smoke. He did not drink. However, when they did the autopsy, they found a can of tobacco in his pocket and $67.50, which does not sound like a lot of money today, but back then was over $2,000 in value.
Wow.
So he was carrying a little bit of money. He was extremely well-to-do. His estate was assessed to be more than $500,000, and that was in 1892 money. So that would be approximately $15 to $18 million in today's money.
Wow.
So soon after noontime, the police asked Lizzie, "Would you like us to come back and talk to you tomorrow? This has been a very upsetting day." And she said, "No, no, no, I'll answer your questions." And they thought that that was suspicious, that she would answer the questions. So soon after that, she was the number one suspect, and all other possible suspects, and basically that would be only two people, Bridget and Uncle John, because they were at the premises. They became prosecution witnesses, and they did not ask them any tough questions after that.
And again, from the point of arrest, how much time elapses before day one of the trial?
Okay, so the deaths occurred on the 4th. The funeral occurred on the 6th by invitation only. The wake, of course, was at the home. They were open caskets. And soon after that, there was an inquiry. That was the only time that Lizzie testified. We do know that she was under the doctor's care. That would be Dr. Bowen, and he had prescribed a sedative to calm her nerves, and the sedative that they prescribed was morphine. So we know when we had the inquiry, she was under the under morphine control, being taken morphine, and that was the only time that she ever testified. And she was in the inquiry, she was not allowed to have an attorney, and that's an interesting side story that we can talk about sometime. That was the judge's prerogative not to allow her to have an attorney at the inquiry. That is not the case now. And there was another case in 1969 involving Chappaquiddick Island, and that's when that rule was changed. So she was a suspect and was held at the Fall River jail. They had no accommodations for women. And when the preliminary hearing was held, she was bound over to the House of Correction and jail in Taunton, Mass. And she spent from the time of the crime, several days after the crime, until her trial. And the trial was in June of the following year.
And how many days does the trial last?
The trial lasted approximately 20 days, which was a long trial because they worked 6 days a week back then. Partial Saturday. They recessed early on Saturday. The other days they recessed somewhere between 4 and 5 o'clock. So they were working 6 days a week. And after numerous numbers of witnesses for both sides, they charged the jury, and an all-male jury. And the reason that it was an all-male jury was because we didn't allow women to be jury members in 1892.
Interesting. Was it a 12-person jury panel?
It was a 12-person jury trial. And
so they go to deliberate after this 20 days, but she is acquitted in literally an hour and a half. Is that right?
That's right. 90 minutes.
What do you attribute such a fast acquittal to on a double axe murder?
Several reasons. She had the dream team as far as attorneys go. You hear about cases where like OJ had the dream team, Well,
she had the Johnny Cochran of 1892.
yes, and his name was George Robinson, and he was formerly governor of Massachusetts.
Wow.
And he also was the guy who appointed two of the three judges that were on the bench at her trial. I'm not sure that had anything to do with it, but he was the lead prosecutor. She had an attorney named Jennings, who was her father's attorney, and he had the sense right off the bat that the authorities had already pre-decided who was guilty in this crime, and he was the one that said you should get a more powerful attorney than I, and advised her to get Judge Robinson. And it is rumored that she, her and her sister Emma, paid $25,000 in 1892 money for Judge Robinson to represent her.
During the build up to the trial, what happens? Where does Uncle John? I assume they rule out very quickly the housekeeper, but what does Uncle John do in the in the days sort of leading up to the trial? And the trial, does he take a low profile at that point?
Well, very. He had to stay for the inquiry because he was on the list for those to speak at the inquiry. I don't want to say witnesses because they're not witnesses. An inquiry is just to determine whether a crime had occurred. The preliminary hearing, he was a witness. That was held the end of August. He was in Massachusetts for the grand jury hearing, which was around Thanksgiving, the end of November. And at the grand jury had trouble deciding whether or not there was enough evidence to bring Lizzie to court. And they brought in, at the very end, her best friend, Alice Russell. And Alice testified that she saw Lizzie burn a dress, which was supposedly paint covered, on the Sunday following the crime. And she put it, because back then you had a stove in the kitchen and you kept it going most of the time because that's what you did your cooking on. And she had this dress that had paint stains on it. The police had searched the house. At that time, the police had searched the house 4 times. And they had taken out emptied every closet. They looked in every possible way for any blood on clothing. They found 1 drop of blood on bottom of 1 dress, which they attributed to other factors, not to the crime. So, with that Alice Russell testimony to the grand jury found just cause to bring her to trial for an indictment.
Well, but what do you? I mean, so you attribute the dream team. So it was a good legal team. Let me ask you this: how big was this case at the time nationally? Obviously, it was pre-social media, this was the age of newspapers, pre-broadcast news. How big was this case? I mean, did people in Los Angeles know about this at the time?
Of course, at the time there was telegraph. There were reporters as far away from New York for all the major newspapers in the Boston area. And the place was packed. It was a circus. People jamming to get in. They used the skulls as, and I'll show you one here.
Yeah.
This is a picture of one and the picture of the other. They use the actual skulls as part of the evidence.
Wow.
Which means that the skulls were separated from the bodies at the time of internment, and they were interned at a later date after the trial.
Wow.
So it was a show.
Yeah. So the house is still there. Actually, you started this off by saying your daughter is fascinated. Are they buried there to this?
The Abby and Andrew are buried in Oak Grove Cemetery at the Borden lot. Emma, that would be the sister.
Yeah.
She is also buried there, as is Lizzie. Now, Lizzie legally changed her name to Lizbeth.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, so post-acquittal, what happens to Lizzie Borden?
Well, she goes back to 92 2nd Street, the scene of the crime, and within 6 months after that, her sister and she moved to French Street, which is upscale in the hill section of Fall River, at a fancy house which Lizzie called Maplecroft, and that house is also still there. And so and they lived together in that house until 1905. For some reason or another, they had a falling out in 1905. There's all kinds of speculation why. Some believe that Emma finally came to the conclusion that Lizzie was responsible. Others think that Emma did not like Lizzie's friends. Lizzie enjoyed the theater, and she invited actors, and they would have get-togethers at her house at Maplecroft, and actors at that time were not held in the best light. She was very friendly with a woman by the name of Nance O'Neill, who was a big silent film actress, who later became an actress in sound films. And her and Lizzie had a mutual interest in animal rights, and Emma moved out in 1905, went to Rhode Island, finally wound up in Newmarket, New Hampshire. And interestingly enough, they passed away within 8 days of each other, and they were 9.5 years in age apart.
Wow.
Lizzie passed away first from complications of gallbladder surgery, and she was approximately 66 at the time. And Emma, who was up in Newmarket, New Hampshire, fell, broke her hip. And of course, back then, breaking the hip was almost like a death sentence, pneumonia set in and things like that. Yeah. So they passed away within about 8 days of each other. Wow. And they are both buried at Oak Grove Cemetery, which is probably about three-quarters to a mile away from the Borden home.
Now, you believe that it was Uncle John. What happens to him after the trial?
Well, after the grand jury, and he testified at the grand jury, after the grand jury, he went back to Iowa. And then he came east again for the trial in June. And interestingly enough, and he was coming back and forth. He lived near New Bedford, and the trial was held in New Bedford because that's where Superior Court was located. The trial was not in Fall River. The trial was in New Bedford, which is approximately 15 to 18 miles away. And when he, at the end of the trial, went down to pick up his witness fee, because they would pay witnesses a small token fee to come in, and they said, well, where did you travel from to get there? And they knew that he was staying in Westport, which is approximately 7 miles from New Bedford. And he said, well, I came from Iowa. And they said, well, we're not going to pay you to come from Iowa. So he tried to get a witness fee based on mileage. After he got his witness fee, he left Fall River, never to be seen again in Fall River.
Do we know how old he was when he passed or anything?
Yeah, he was 79 years old when he was passed. He was 59 years old when the murders occurred.
Well, another long life, relatively, back then. So, going full circle, you said what brought you into this case. Your daughter, I believe her name is Brenda. What was Brenda's reaction to you writing this book and getting it published, and all the work you did on it?
She's absolutely thrilled. I dedicated to her, and it was a revelation. First of all, that the book did so well, and there was so much interest about the case, and the book was published a while back, and then when Seth asked me, and Seth and I work at the same high school. I as a teacher, and he works in the TV radio production over there. I was asked to come on a podcast and talk about my Lizzie Borden book, and we could not believe the response, both to our podcast and to the book. There was a resurgence of the book. There had to be reprints made of the book. And it's taken on a whole new life of its own since we started doing the podcast, and that'll be just about a year on the beginning of May.
Yeah, and the podcast is the Seth Rosinski Show, which I won't even try to spell, but if you put in Seth ROC podcast, it'll come up. My final question, Rich. Why are we still talking about this 130 years later? Why did your video, your podcast, go viral on YouTube? What's happening?
Well, basically, there are two sides of the fence. Those who believe that she did not do it, that she could not do it, that the facts don't fit. And then those who absolutely are convinced that she's guilty. And those people they're still arguing about it. And when I go out on a speaking event and speak to a library group or something like that, there are people who absolutely are convinced she had to do it. They just want to believe. And I think that's a lot with a lot of cases. People can't, and they don't want to accept evidence that changes their mind. I think the facts speak for themselves. I think that the authorities, as they often do, rush to judgment. And I think that Lizzie, she was found innocent in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion, it was a split decision.
Interesting. Well, you just listened to an hour of Rich Little and his book that he's co-authored, titled "Cold Case to Case Closed." Cold Case to Case Closed. Elizabeth Borden. That is the book. You're looking at it, and Rich says Lizzie didn't do it. So Cold Case to Case Closed, Elizabeth Borden. My story says Lizzie didn't do it. Available on Amazon and anywhere books are sold. That is the famous photo of Lizzie Borden. Interesting. So interesting. Massachusetts has unbelievable history. I had the good fortune of going to college up there. My final question to you, Rich, and then your final thoughts. What keeps you teaching after 55 plus years, and your final thoughts?
Probably insanity. Other than the fact that I absolutely love it. It's I have the best job in the world. I'm the grandfather to about 550 students. I think it's good for them. A lot of 17, 18-year-olds do not get to react with people who are classified as elderly. And I when we chatted once before, I said that I hate that word because elderly kind of gives you the stigma that well, out to pasture, and that's not the case. And you proved that case with Karm. Karm is in the same age bracket as I am, and we're active, and we have an opinion, and we're able to express that.
And kudos to you, and 100%. You know, I see this with my mom's friends. Not my mom, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other time. But once you reach a certain age, you're kind of marginalized by society. It should not be the case. You see Rich Little writing books, still teaching, Karm hosting a podcast. So your 80s, the new 50s, maybe, Rich Little. Keep at it. It's awesome to meet you and Seth. Again, Seth's podcast is the Seth Brzezinski Show, which Rich co-hosts with him. And Rich's book, once again, Rich Little, like the Canadian comic, Cold Case to Case Closed, Lizzie Borden, My Story Says Lizzie Didn't Do It. On that note, love you, America. Love you, Fall River, Massachusetts, the South Shore of Boston, Massachusetts. I can't do the accent. And justice here for Andrew and Abby Borden. They are the victims in this case. And who knows, maybe one day we will have 100% definitive answer. But for now, that was the story of Lizzie Borden. And Rich, stick around one quick second here.